This was such an interesting conversation with Nova Rose. Being a neurodivergent mother, raising two neurodivergent children, and now focusing all of her work and passion in this area, she shared a real new version of really what it means to be neurodivergent. And truly, anybody who is raising a child who is neurodivergent, or if you think that's a possibility that they might be, or you think you might be, um, or if you have children and they're in school and some of their classmates are, this is a really important conversation. And I urge you to listen to the entire thing. And I am sure by the end of it, you will be as excited about the new things you learned as I am. I've listened to this episode 3 times already, and each time I heard something different. But the concept of understanding that being neurodivergent isn't what we think of stereotypically, that it truly is just that other people are speaking in a different language and it's up to us to learn that language, learn how to translate it, and just recognize, the gifts and the challenges, just like any other human being. But it's a new perspective. It will have an impact on the way you think about neurodivergency, and you will be moved. So enjoy the episode. Too many boys today feel lost, alone, and misunderstood. Too many parents feel the same. Behind today's troubling statistics is a generation of boys longing to be seen, heard, and valued. And yet the conversation around boys' emotional lives is still far too quiet. This new season of Unlocking the Parenting Code is here to change that. This season you'll hear more real conversations with young men, more expert voices on boys' mental health, more solo episodes where I share truths I've learned firsthand, and more wisdom from parents walking this road right now. It's time to open our eyes, open our hearts, and become the change our boys need. Boys aren't broken. They're waiting for us to truly see them, hear them, and stand with them. So tune in to Unlocking the Parenting Code for real conversations, real hope, and a new path forward for our boys. It's time. They're ready. Are we? Welcome back to Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. I'm your host, Kathy, and today I'm welcoming Nova Rose, a fierce advocate for neurodivergent families and a powerful voice for parents raising children who feel too much for the world. Nova is a trauma-informed parent coach, EFT practitioner, and emotional alchemist whose work blends science and soul. Her journey began when both of her children were diagnosed with autism and ADHD, and she discovered she was neurodivergent also. Faced with a lack of support and mounting guilt, Nova went searching for tools that simply didn't exist. What she found instead was a new path, one rooted in emotional healing, nervous system support, mindset work, and radical compassion. Rather than accept the labels and limits placed on her family, Nova retrained to become the coach she once needed. Today, she helps tweens, teens, and parents move from chaos to connection, empowering families to regulate emotions, build confidence, and transform meltdowns into moments of growth. This conversation will be filled with real talk, lived wisdom, and the kind of encouragement every parent needs, especially if you've ever felt like you were failing. Nova, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And by the end of it, I'm really hoping to have a deeper understanding of what it means to be neurodivergent. So according to the World Health Organization, around 15 to 20% of the global population is considered neurodivergent in some form. And from what I understand, it's not that we've suddenly have more neurodivergent people, it's just that we're getting better at recognizing and diagnosing. So for anyone that's listening, especially parents and caregivers, it feels really important that we all understand better what it means to be neurodivergent versus neurotypical. Could you start off the conversation by helping us build that foundational understanding?
I can, but what I would like to do is come at it from a different perspective, because you can look online and look at what neurodivergence means in terms of the science. However, I feel very strongly that neurodivergence is misrepresented, mostly when even from sadly, even from many therapists and things that you see, which is that if you're neurodivergent, you lack social skills, you don't know how to communicate, things like that. So, my perspective of neurodivergence is that it's simply like another language. So, it's like it's as though I'm French and I live in a French culture, versus someone that lives in a completely different culture. I don't know what's opposite to French, Japan,
Mm,
Indonesian, or something like that. You
yeah.
know, very different cultures and ways of living. And just even with the language barrier, when they first meet, they don't know each other's language, so they don't have that communication built yet. So a French person walking into the Indonesian culture might go, they might say, oh, this person has no communication skills, but they have, just in their own culture. So there are studies coming out now that show that when neurodivergent people are all together, or particularly with autism, with autistic people together, there is no problem with communication and nobody is lacking in social skills. The problem is when an autistic child is put into a neurotypical setting, which is one of the main things we see in the school setting, which is set up, the education system is set up for neurotypical behaviors at the moment. So it makes it really, really hard for the autistic child or ADHD child to thrive in those conditions. But if they were given their own special way of thriving in a school that works for them, there's no, the issues are not there. It's when we're trying to blend the two cultures. So I I do have to say, I don't agree that neurodivergent people lack social skills. I just strongly believe there's just a lack of understanding. And for parents in particular, it's hard when you first, realize this is the journey you're on of raising neurodivergent children. It's very, very hard. But the challenge is because we're trying to fit that child into a different box. And so what I've learned as a parent is, well, when I just embrace how we are and find the ways for us to just be ourselves, which is a challenge when you've got a whole society that's set up for neurotypical, but when you find those ways and tweak and start shifting how you perceive your child and how you communicate with them, a lot of the challenges just don't seem like challenges in the same way. Does that make any sense?
It really does. It really does. My whole career was in international education,
Yeah.
and I don't think many schools, um, like they've just got, there's so many rules, and so if you're outside of the box for some reason, um, that form of education isn't, it's not on your menu. You don't have that choice. And I remember the first time that I really was in an environment that was different and that really was inclusive. I was working in Bangkok, and they had a system set up. It was an early years elementary setting, and they had a group of people who were very knowledgeable, and they trained some assistant teachers. And so the school really became quite known for accepting neurodivergent children. Um, so that was my first real experience of directly working with children who didn't fit the normal mold, although there is no normal mold. That's one thing I'm sure of. But it was the most beautiful experience I ever had because I had no idea what the gifts were and what the challenges were. And in the classroom, it was the experiences I had, it was quite smooth. But what really fascinated me, like really, really fascinated me, is when we would be out on the playground, so that all the classes would be out on the playground. It was a fair size group, and the children, each classroom probably had maybe three children who were somewhere, on the spectrum of something. And the classroom was fine. It was okay. But when the children were on the playground, it was like they had this magnet radar. And so exactly what you were just saying about, speaking a different language. And all of a sudden they would just kind of get together and play because they could choose what they wanted to do and who they wanted to do it with. And I thought it was just the most fascinating thing. And so when you talk about language, I think that just kind of really validates that whole point of
Mm.
that. On the same light, at that point, I had been in my career for a long time. And same thing, when I was on the playground, I remember trying to step in with a little boy who wasn't under my direct supervision in my age grouping, but there was some play going on, and it looked a little more aggressive than I thought, was really safe in that environment and in the place that they were playing. And I tried to intervene, and I got nowhere. Like all the tricks and things I understood about how to respectfully interact with children when you wanted to alter their or help them make different choices, safer choices. And I could not get through to this child. Like nothing worked. And I really felt incompetent.
Mm.
And just, it was like, I don't know. And then I stepped back, and the person who was responsible, like we called them shadow teachers. That's probably inappropriate, but that's what they were called. And I saw his shadow teacher who had been observing the whole thing. Like he knew what was going on. And he stepped in. And I don't know exactly what he did, but all of a sudden everything was diffused. It's like they spoke the same language. And it
Mm.
was just it was the most beautiful thing I ever saw. In the
Mm.
same light, I thought how frustrating it must be. And not just for the child, but for the child, for the parent, for the teacher
Mm.
that don't know how to connect, don't know how to speak that language. So that's kind of what I really was excited about today, because now I have that experience. I've seen it. It's a different world. And but it should be one that we all understand what the gifts and what the challenges are so that we can be together better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
what was it like in your home before you had all this knowledge and information?
Yeah. Well, I mean, before I before we even knew that that was going to be our journey of neurodivergence, I was in a really, really bad place. I when my daughter was very little, so like 2, so that means my son would have been a baby at that point. I couldn't, I would leave playgroup. We would go to playgroup or something, and I would leave just crying my eyes out, and I would cry for hours afterwards because the other children were able to put the toys away, and the parents could say something and even get down to their level and communicate and do all the things that you read about. And I would do the same thing, and my child would be on the floor having a meltdown for 3 hours, and I would have to drag her into the car and strap her in while she scratched my face. And I would cry for the rest of the time, and they'd be like, "How do I go out? I can't even go out." And as my son started to grow up, we had similar things, but also he was very, very highly anxious, and so he couldn't go in anywhere. So even a play group or something like that, he just couldn't. So he'd be screaming, cover his ears, grabbing me, and just So I, at that point, had no clue, never really heard of autism or ADHD, or it just wasn't on my radar at all. And I just internalized it all as it's me. I'm the worst parent that ever lived. I knew I had my own childhood trauma, and so I did directly link it to that. It's like, well, I didn't have a great childhood, so I didn't have a good example of great parenting. So therefore, that's why I am the worst parent ever. That's why my kids can't behave. And that's what I looked at it as, was my kids can't behave. You know, why do we have all of this crazy behavior, crazy emotions, unable to listen to instructions, which I interpreted at that point of just not listening or doing it on purpose, which is, you know, what you tend to think. And so at that point, I was seeing a counselor, I was seeing a psychologist. The doctor had put me on antidepressants, and I felt inside, this isn't the answer. Like, yeah, fine, I'll take the drugs to see if that helps. But it just, for me personally, and no judgment at all for anyone's individual journey, but for me personally, I knew it wasn't the thing. I was like, I know I'm not depressed. I just don't know what to do, and how do I get parenting support that works for me? And I'd done parenting courses, all the classes, and it didn't work. And I know now that's because everything that I was looking at was aimed at, I guess, neurotypical. There was just no definition between doing something for, or not that I was on my radar, doing something specifically for neurodivergent children. Probably if I'd come across that, maybe I would have interacted with them differently from that younger age.
So you
But
just
at
felt
that
you
point,
needed to you just felt that you needed to up level your parenting skills.
I just felt like nothing worked. I felt like I was trying all the things, and I couldn't. I felt like I couldn't, and I'm going to use inverted commas, I couldn't control my children, as in they wouldn't do anything I asked. Um, Simple things like turning off the TV to go and get ready for bed, things like that, which I know a lot of younger kids struggle with the transition, but there's a next level when there's autism and ADHD involved. It's not just a, 10-minute or even a half an hour kind of tantrum about it. It's 3 hours of non-stop screaming, and screaming in your face and destroying the house. It's next level. So you sort of, you spend a lot of time, especially when they're little, or I personally spent a lot of time just in survival mode, but also in just trauma of like, what do I do with this? It was so traumatic. And I didn't feel, and I remember just sort of crying for help, to myself, just like, someone help me. Like, I need help, but I didn't know what that help was. I didn't know. Everywhere I was turning for help just wasn't helping me.
So you mentioned that you also were diagnosed. So do you think your parents were challenged in the same way that you were challenged initially?
I don't think that my personal upbringing is a particularly good um, example for that question, because there was other circumstances going on within our family environment that made me a child who was going to obey no matter what.
Okay.
And I've grown up a bit of a people pleaser, still working through that. And however, saying that, I can see the patterns further down the generations. So both my parents are neurodivergent. My father actually did get a diagnosis when he was in his 60s. And looking back through the generations on my mum's side, there's been a big rift between my mum and her mum, and I can see, and from what she's told me, that there would have been that challenge there of, why aren't you behaving? You need to, but back then in the older generations, there was a lot more just punishment. If you didn't behave, you were beaten into line. And so that's where the difference comes in, is that older generations, and that's actually why a lot of parents struggle now as well, because their parents are still from that generation of, well, just beat them. You
Yeah.
know, not that that's the answer, but just be stricter, get the wooden spoon out, that kind of thing. Then they won't talk back to you. Yeah, sure, they might pull them into line, but is that really what we're trying to create? Is that fear-based, child? So
So,
yes, I
go ahead.
saw that. Sorry, I was going to say, yes, I did see that from the stories I've heard from both my parents about their parenting experience. Um, However, I think because there was that kind of beat you to be submissive and do what you're told, for myself as a child, I was just that kid who wouldn't dare put my foot out of line.
So then how did it come about for your family? Like, how old were the children when, or was it, the first child and you, like, what does it look like? How did you find out and get the help and then go on your own path to figure things out more?
Yeah. So it started while my daughter was still at kinder, and she was probably about 4.5. And one of the kinder teachers pulled us aside to say, I don't remember the exact conversation, but he was kind of sort of saying, maybe you should get her looked at in some way. He said, I've noticed a few things. I've noticed a few behaviors or something like that. Um, and gave me some leaflets about some, so and it was just that it was a very quick conversation, but it was actually enough for me to just go, oh, maybe there's more to it. I've been searching for this help, blaming myself, but maybe there is more here because somebody else has now acknowledged that. Um, so we went down the process really quite fast. Within a few months, she had a diagnosis of autism. So that was at 5. And then my son, who would have been 3 at the time, pretty much he followed straight afterwards. So the psychologist that was helping us to get the diagnosis for my daughter, she said, he's old enough, we can, if you want to just get him diagnosed now, or if you want to wait, basically sort of saying, you got the same things going on here, so do you want to formalize it, or what? So we did the same thing. So we got my son diagnosed pretty much at the same time. So he would have been 3. And my diagnosis came in the few months after that, when we first started therapy. And it's a very common conversation that I hear from a lot of mums, which is through the therapies and the different therapists telling us, oh, but they do this and they do this and they do this, like, this isn't normal, this isn't normal, this isn't normal. And me going, yes, it is. That's all normal. My mum does that. My dad does that. My nan does that. Everyone in my whole family does that. And then I went, oh, hold on a minute. So you're saying, and they're like, uh-huh. And the penny dropped. And I realized it just all unraveled. And I realized, hold on, we're all autistic and ADHD. I cannot think of one person in my family that doesn't fall under the umbrella of neurodivergence.
So then what happens? Like, once, okay, so you've got these young children and yourself, you have a label to put on it basically, but what does that mean? Like, how does that change your world? When I was raising my son, I longed for a guide, something real, honest, and grounded in what boys truly need. So I created the book that I wish I'd had. Packed with tools and real world strategies that actually work, you'll learn how to nurture his emotional world and finally understand the feelings behind his behavior. Because boys don't need punishment, they need guidance. We'll bust the myths that keep boys boxed in and help you support him through the real challenges of growing up. Most of all, it's about transforming your connection, one small moment at a time. Raising boys who become remarkable men. Get your copy today, and let's create a beautiful future together.
So at the start, it was very, very hard. Although I have to say, here in Australia, there was a lot of support available. So I guess I still felt quite helpless as a parent. So I was just going along with what the support was there and what I was told to do next. So for me, one of the hardest things that's, put me on this path of doing the job I do now, it was signing the forms to say you have to sign in order to get the help and start seeing specialists. You need to sign to make the diagnosis official and sign that your child is disabled. And I had a real problem with that personally, because I'm like, there's two happy playing kids. Yes, we've got a lot of problems, it felt like, but I didn't consider we had a disability. And I've never felt comfortable with that. And this is what made me question with your first question is, tell us about neurodivergence. Is when you jump online, it talks, everything you read is buying into that that perception of this is a disorder, it's a deficit, there's something wrong, you're disabled. And I really want to challenge that, because I don't feel disabled in any way. In my personal life, I'm autistic, ADHD, and nothing's helped. I haven't been held back. Sure, we have challenges, but doesn't everyone? So that was a challenge for me, and I kind of just rolled with it though. I was like, this is the help I've been looking for, let's get started. And what at that point, so I had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and we were seeing 3 therapists a week for each child, so 6 therapists, or 6 people, 6 visits, but we weren't having to go somewhere all the time. Some of those were done in school or in home, things like that. But there was a lot of time spent on occupational therapy, speech therapy, although the speech therapy was much more about social skills. So again, really thinking back on it, the way it was presented to us was, there's a problem with your child's way of fitting in with the group, so we have to teach them the new skills to be able to fit in, otherwise they won't be accepted, is how I interpreted it. And then psychologists as well. And I have to say, like, the psychologist we had, she was amazing, because she was the one that gave us practical understanding of what we can do differently. For example, finding out that my children both had a 8 to 10 second working memory or processing delay, I think it's called. Mm-hmm. So when I would give an instruction, they don't receive it to be able to act on it for 10 seconds. So saying, let's put your socks on, waiting 10 seconds is a long time before you say it again. So I was finding, before knowing this, I'm like, let's put your socks on. Few seconds, and then so by the time the 10 seconds or thereabouts, I'm already angry and yelling, and they're hearing it for the first time. So things like that were really useful. So in those first few months, we did gain a lot of insight and information that was valuable, such as slowing down how you ask, how you ask for your requests to be towards your child, like that 10 seconds. And yeah, there was a lot of information there that we learned, which was just quite standard sort of autism, ADHD training. But that helped a lot. And that helped quite a lot with the feelings inside of me that, it's not all just me. There's actually ways that we need to change. There's ways I need to communicate differently and that will work better. And so maybe I'm not the worst parent in the world. However, we still were having almighty meltdowns. Nothing changed. And a meltdown is different to a tantrum. So an autistic meltdown has different characteristics to a tantrum.
Can you share those?
Yeah, so when a neurotypical child is having a tantrum, then they'll throw themselves on the floor and cry and scream, and they're regulating their nervous system as they do it. And, they can last for a reasonable amount of time, still maybe 20 minutes or something, or half an hour. And then usually you can either distract the child or help them out of it in some way. And that's where those beautiful instructions that you often see for parents, such as be near them, let them know that you're a safe person, all that kind of thing. That works for a child who's a neurotypical child who's tantruming. For a neurodivergent child, meltdown, it's where they've become completely overloaded by everything, such as not just maybe your instructions and how they're feeling and things like that, but the lights, the sound of the fan, the dog barking outside, all of this extra stimulus causes them to completely shut down. So they will throw themselves on the floor still and tantrum to regulate their nervous system. However, they're unable to pull themselves out of it. Often they'll hurt themselves or hurt you or completely destroy whatever's around them. Like it's very common to hear from parents, particularly in support groups, oh, we're on our third TV this month, that kind of thing, because it's been smashed. And often being near them is almost worse. And they'll scream at you to get away, whatever. And it can last like 3 hours. I don't know, easy. Sometimes, not always that long. And there's no pulling them out of it at all. Once it's actually happening, it is just about managing your own nervous system and trying to keep things safe, keeping other children safe. But there's not really much you can do. You can't pull them out of it. You can't reason with them in any way. You can't pull out a lollipop and it magically goes away.
So does that just get better with maturity? Like if there's nothing you can do, is it something that just as they get older, they're able to manage that better? Or
Yeah, partly. We're growing and learning throughout our whole life. So there's always the opportunity to learn how to regulate your nervous system better. Depending, and this is one of the spaces that I work in, because there's not enough awareness around this. And a lot of older kids that are neurodivergent carry a lot of shame because they have believed that their out of control emotions are too big. There's often a lot of head hitting, like self-harming. So keeping them safe from themselves is quite important. And as they grow, and I can actually think of my own personal experience of this as well. Yes, it does change. You don't throw yourself on the floor anymore because you learn from society that that's not acceptable. However, you still need to process what's happened in your brain. So a lot of older kids, when I say older, I'm talking about past the school age. So from say 5 or maybe from sort of 8 or 9 and up to teens, the feelings are just as big. The meltdowns still happen, but yes, there may be more shutdown. So they may completely close themselves off and not speak to anyone for sometimes days. And when that shutdown happens, it can happen with that they might not get out of bed for days. It's a complete shutdown of all systems, pretty much. And for myself personally, which I now know is quite common, I just put it onto myself. So I used to I could get the emotion out of myself by hitting my head or squeeze or like drawing blood on my arms or something like that. And so that's the way I had my meltdowns. And even to this day, and I teach this to young kids now because it's super healthy, is the emotion has to move through your body. So even to this day, if I'm going to have my own meltdown, I'll go and scream into a pillow and punch the pillows. And that's an incredibly healthy thing to do. Mm-hmm. But society has sort of said, okay, well, maybe just a little bit, but not too much. Otherwise, there's something wrong with you still. And it's like, well, actually, I don't think there is something wrong with you. We just haven't been allowed to really express the emotions the way we need to. So as a neurodivergent child grows, yes, it will change. And same as any child, that will depend on what kind of upbringing they've got, whether they internalize it and end up bottling it up, and that can lead to mental health issues further down the track, or whether they're given a safe space to do it. And same as any kid, they might channel it into sport or into something else that's a particular interest of theirs. I'm I'm particularly lucky with my son. He channels it into basketball. It's extreme. He's in 3 teams. We spend a lot of hours doing a lot of basketball. And the sort of standard line for that is, oh, it's his special interest, which is what a lot of the terminology is used around autistic kids. Yes, he has got a real passion in it, but it's also his regulation for himself. If he doesn't get to do that, then his behaviors that are considered autistic behaviors are far, far more hurricane-like.
So how old are your children now?
My son is 12 and my daughter is 14.
Okay. So with your boy, because so I am really um, just dipping my toes into trying to understand better. And it was mostly from my experience in Bangkok that really sparked that interest to try to understand better. But there sometimes I find similarities, in the way society misunderstands boys in general, boys that are considered to be neurotypical, because the behavior that is
Mm-hmm.
expected of them is not
Yeah.
the real behavior that they're feeling. So,
Mm.
so do you think that that would be even more challenging to be a young boy who is neurodivergent, kind of
Yeah.
having two things thrown in his ball game?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I see this with some of my younger clients that might not be neurodivergent. What's expected of boys, particularly in the school environment, is quite unrealistic. Um, I think when you throw neurodivergence on top of that, it just makes the ability, it depends on the diagnosis, because there are, the sort of hyperactive type behaviors that you see where they can't sit still, but you also get the inattentive types where you might fly under the radar more and be more about as though they're not able to listen and away with the fairies kind of thing. But if you're hyperactive and you need that movement, which, let's face it, all boys need that anyway, well, and the girls, but the boys more so.
Especially boys, yeah.
Exactly. To me, it's just that next level of not being able to participate, say, for example, in a classroom environment. So a teacher might get all the kids on their feet and taking a body break and moving, and or go outside and do something, come back in, and then majority of them will settle down to be able to do what they have to do. The child that's hyperactive or needs more regulation, if they are expected to just come and then settle down, that might be unrealistic for them. So it's not that they need more movement outside, it's that they might need it more continuously. So maybe they should be the ones that are allowed to stand up at their desk and do their work, or sit on a wobbly stool, or that's when you have the fidgets and all that kind of stuff. So to allow the movement, or if you've got a great teacher who's really onto it, they'll know that that child needs extra body breaks. So that will be the child that gets to hand out the bits of paper, and and then he has to go and do this, and then he has to go. So he does all these teachers' jobs, but that's giving him that extra movement so that he can regulate and then be able to learn. So definitely bigger challenge, a much bigger challenge, because a lot of this isn't recognized by a lot of schools even today. And a reasonable amount of my job seems to be talking to schools and talking to the teachers and explaining what else, how else it could work, what else he needs, in order to be able to do some schoolwork. And if they're not given those opportunities, that's when you can see some quite damaging behavior, such as a lot of shouting over everyone else, even throwing chairs. And that's often where you hear, well, they've been suspended or kicked out for the day, or all that sort of thing, because they're a danger to other people. And it's like, yes, because we're trying to squeeze them into this little box and make them do it this way. If we recognize that and give them what they need, that's not going to be the problem. I do understand that that's not necessarily possible when you've got one teacher managing well, I know here it can be up to nearly 30 kids. So
Yeah, but
for that,
that's the same thing as sorry to interrupt. That's kind of the same thing as um, uh, not recognizing what the child needs. Like that you're looking at the system, you're not looking
yeah,
at the child. And so for each child that, actually for each child, it's different what they need. But when you were talking, it was kind of what I've been doing for it seems like forever now as well, but it's trying to create the awareness because when people don't have the information and the understanding, like when teachers don't understand what that perspective is from a little boy's point of view, and
yeah,
and especially there's one thing like when you were talking, it was kind of I know for most boys, if not all boys, they have an aversion that is stronger than any little girl has for shame. So if they're
yes,
embarrassed or they're shamed, it's like that's the end of their world. So when they're in environments where they are challenged
mm,
because they're not behaving the same way, basically the same way that the little girls are behaving, then not only do, their whole self-esteem, their whole sense of
absolutely.
self-worth takes a real, nosedive. And that's just such a,
Yeah. And that's my absolute passion. That's, you just lit it up in me right then. It's like helping. This is why I work so much in that space of understanding your emotions, particularly with, neurodivergent males or kids, to help them realize there's nothing wrong with them and help them to let go of some of that shame and give them some strategies and other things that will work for them. Because you're right, that sensitivity is so heightened in boys,
yeah,
and they're the ones. Look, I'm hoping it's changing, but it's such a warped. We've lived in this warped world of toughen up. The boys just toughen up, don't cry, da da da. And the boys are the more sensitive, caring
emotional.
one
Yeah,
out of the two. In my experience, out of
yeah,
the two genders, you've got the boys are the ones that need extra nurturing and all this extra support, and yet they seem to be the ones lumped with the most shame because the way as soon as they show emotion and everything, it's not acceptable. And then when you throw neurodivergence on top of that, it just makes it 10 times worse. So that's where I breaks my heart with the young adults that I have that have already just been shut down, basically hate themselves because they've never got it right as a kid and they've been told to toughen up and they were super sensitive and now they're not in a great place. And I see my own little boy who is just the most sensitive creature,
yeah,
and it's wonderful. I'm so grateful that he came, that I had him and that he's in my life, because he's such a contrast from my daughter. And boys more than, you're right, boys even more than girls need, not only do they need to move more, but they need to be able to be treated and move the way they need without creating that shame, without feeling like they can't do it compared to their peers. And I mean, we're lucky in our school. We've got a beautiful school and the teachers are amazing. And so all the boys will be doing more jobs and moving around. And it's not just that one boy that needs
yeah,
it. There'll be a lot more movement in general. And the girls can sit down and do their coloring and drawing or whatever it is they like, you know what I mean? There's that often that big difference. And the boys get to run outside, quickly kick the ball and come back in or something like that.
yeah. I do find that especially the elementary years are the hardest ones for the little
Mm.
boys because they start
Yeah.
off school and they're pure and they've got stars in their eyes and they're so excited, and little by little, that spark just gets, drowned. Like
Yeah.
they get lost in the system. So
Yeah, I totally agree with you with that. And I still don't feel like there's a whole lot of recognition around that within the
no,
school. From my
there's
experience.
not. Like I've
Yeah.
been in the system for, I was in the system for more than 40 years. And the last
Wow.
10 years were in like administration leadership roles. And so for almost 30 years, I've been learning and sharing about boys in connection. And I used to think, first I thought, well, I'm in education. This is where people are going to want to understand this even better because we all have little boys in our classrooms. And you know, some people, of course, received it really well, but some really didn't care. Like it didn't resonate that anything would be different if they learned a little bit more. But who did jump, quite deep into understanding more was any teacher who was also the mom of a boy
Yeah.
because she was getting the phone calls from her colleagues. They were meeting in the hallway saying, you got to do something about this little guy. He's, taking the classroom over and can't
Mm.
sit still and can't. So it's just such a shame. But I do think things are changing, and I think not fast enough, and not enough. But I think it's even slower for having educators or people, just having people understand about neurodivergence and what that really means. Because even when, like I did spend a little bit of time trying to understand better so that I could be more competent in this conversation, because my understanding was very just personal experience, basically. And there are positive things happening. Like I saw, I don't know, there's a few things in Canada happening that is portraying children who have, actually, it's usually someone who is autistic or Down syndrome or something, and there's more of that being shown in the media. There's TV shows that are starring these, and it's kind of, well, that's one way to get
Mm.
some information out there. But for like for any mom who
Mm.
is raising children, because I would think at first when the children are really young, you would think, well, this is, everyone tells me about the terrible twos, the trying threes, the frustrating fours. Like everyone says all that. So that's what this is. And I'm not handling it well enough because
Mm.
there's not enough understanding, but not just understanding, support.
Mm.
So I think that's a really huge part of it. Not enough support.
Yeah. And yeah, you're right, the awareness is growing. But I think also for teachers, and this is one of the things that I'm trying to promote in my work because I can see the gap, is that teachers that are willing to educate themselves more on neurodivergence, that's a beautiful thing, but the information that's available is not going to get them the results that they want. So a lot of that information that's available is the standard. um, Okay, so they lack social skills. So being aware that they're going to talk more bluntly to the other kids, that kind of thing. So there's the awareness there, or they're going to need more visual aids than the other kids. So let's print off their keyring with the pictures, things like that. That's all the really sort of standard tools that OTs provide, which look, they're useful. We use them,
Yeah.
and they absolutely are useful. But yet teachers are still really challenged by these kids. And part of the reason for that is because they don't understand that fundamental sensitivity, and particularly with boys, but then with neurodivergence as well. So, neurodivergent children, this is where the lack of social skills comes in. They don't, if they were left to their own devices, they don't value words as a dominant form of communication, which is what the neurotypical society, we value words as a form of communication.
Mhm.
Whereas the neurodivergent community actually picks up on the energy of the situation first as the dominant form of communication. But teachers aren't being taught this. So, yes, you might have the key rings and the body breaks and this and that, But if you're talking to that neurodivergent boy in particular, and you're saying, use your keyring, use your body break, whatever, but inside you're thinking, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. This kid is threatening my identity as a good teacher, and sort of having this probably mixture of wanting to support them but wishing they weren't in their class. All of that stuff that we don't talk about, parents feel it too. That's what the little boy hears first. He doesn't hear the words of use your body break. He hears you don't want me in this class. He doesn't know that. He can't articulate this is what you just thought, obviously, but that's what he picks up on. And so that in itself creates the shame and creates the more dysregulation. And this is when I step into that space of working with educators, because I'm so passionate about this. When you need an educator with that kind of child in their class, if they can take a step back and acknowledge how this child is making them feel, is it challenging them as an educator? What's it really making them feel, and becoming aware of their sort of deep down inner self-talk that they have, that this about this child and what this child is making them feel about themselves. When they acknowledge that and go, okay, yeah, this is how I'm feeling, doesn't, there's a time and a place for processing that, but in the moment of, you have this child in your class, acknowledging that and going, yeah, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here, that kind of thing. And then talking to the child from that space of, hey, why don't we try this, with the energy of, let's see if it works for me and for you. We're on the same page. I don't know what I'm doing. Do you know what I mean? The difference in the energy, that child will respond differently. They won't be as dysregulated because they can feel on some level the energy of the situation is, oh, actually this person is helping me, or we're trying to figure something out together. And so that's where there's a big gap in what the support that teachers have available to them around autism and ADHD. Honestly, most of it I hear and I'm just like, this is garbage. Like, being an autistic person myself, and for years believing I lacked social skills. And if you make me do small talk in a neurotypical environment, say, for example, I find this at basketball with the basketball mums, I've got nothing to say. I won't look at you. They're probably like, gosh, she's rude. But then talking to you about something that just feels I want to talk deep, I want to talk passion, then I have no trouble communicating.
Yeah.
So the advice and the information that's available for teachers, I feel, is quite BS. A lot of it. It's very, very surface level, and it's mostly based on behavioral and observations. Yes, on the outside, it might look like that child is shut down and refusing to communicate. What's happening internally is he can pick up exactly that you're feeling like you don't want him in your class, and he's responding to that. And so I feel like there's a lot of work in that space to really understand what your neurodivergent kids are feeling and going through. And that shame that you talked about with sensitive boys, that isn't really just with neurodivergent boys, that's neurotypical boys as well. I feel like they pick up so much more of what's going on. And then being able to address that first before you talk about the actual thing you want to happen, changes a lot of things.
Yeah, I think because this is my passion is about, the little boys. I feel like from the time I got started on it, although I always resonated with the little boys in my classroom, it was as I understood more. And then I really got curious, like, because I find them so pure.
Yeah.
And so there's something first of all, there's something very protective, because I think too many places in the world, they're not protected, like their feelings and their emotions. But that was kind of it. It was kind of like I learned about their language.
Yeah.
And so then we connect. It's just, and still, even today, it's like with this podcast, I knew I had to, my next step, I have to start talking to young men, because I want that conversation happening too. So I think, like I said, I think there are positive steps that are happening, but it will come from people like you and like me who can't let it go, whether it's because it's something that's happened in their own personal life or whatever. I'm highly sensitive, like, and always thought less of like my self-worth because I don't smile at people
Mm.
just because they're smiling, and I will not make small talk. But
Yeah.
in a conversation like this, you can almost not shut me up. So,
Yeah.
but always felt that that wasn't okay. It wasn't okay to be that way. And I think when you're looking at neurodivergent children who are in
Mm.
the school system, in my opinion, having been in it forever, caters to one style of learning.
Yeah.
And so anyone who isn't in there is going to be challenged. And I think teachers, even though they, I mean, no one goes into teaching without a heart for it because you don't get recognition, you don't make the salary. Like you
Yeah.
have to love what you're doing to be doing it. But
Mm.
most teachers, especially, I can speak mostly to the younger years, like they will say, like at the end of the year where they're making the class list for the next year, you will have requests, please, please, please give me these 5 girls and don't give me any one of those 4 boys. And, I'll take on way more in my classroom. Just don't give me those boys.
Mm.
That's one problem area. But the other problem area is schools have begun a movement that they call inclusiveness and
Mm.
diversity.
Mm.
And it's like, oh, yes, come in, everyone's welcome. And that's beautiful. That is a beautiful situation if you have an environment where those children are going to thrive.
Yeah.
And without teachers, and so then I think it starts at the top. If you don't have an understanding of what those children need, whether it's because of gender or it's because of neurodiversity, if there's not the training, like I love that you said it's about translating the languages there. Like that's a beautiful example. But until that happens, I don't see where there's going to be big success. I think children just learn to get through.
Yeah. I totally agree. I feel like the movement of inclusivity in schools is very tokenistic at the moment, and there isn't the support. And I think ultimately it still comes down to a lack of understanding, but also the setup is it's not, the school environment is not set up to be able to really acknowledge seeing and hearing and validating on that emotional heart to heart level that all kids need.
Mhm.
Um, and so we're throwing it out, oh, we're inclusive. Sure, your kid can come to my school, and it's still in terms of neurodivergence, it's still that very surface level. Oh, well, we can make them some visual cue cards, we can give them extra body breaks, but there's still that real lack of understanding of I'm here for you. I almost that just that real heart to heart connection that those little boys need. And
Again,
to me, that's
that's
inclusive, but
yes, yes, I agree with you. Again, I only have this one school that, I can base this on. Other schools that accepted children who a little bit did not fit in what the normal expectations were, compared to this school, who had a focus on providing a rich environment, a space where these children could thrive.
mm,
Just like the boys in a regular school will tend to have some challenges with self-esteem and self-worth and that kind of stuff. I think that's for everybody that doesn't fit the mold. But what I saw in these children that were, mind you, they were, like 1/5 of the population, maybe, or maybe even 1/6. But what I really felt was, and from them, it really felt like they felt they were special
Yeah,
in a very positive light.
yeah.
And it was beautiful. It was really beautiful.
Well, that they were important
Yeah.
and valued there as like, we want you here, as opposed to the underlying current of you're a disruption to the rest of the class.
Yeah.
And that's that and look, I can understand on a practical, logical level why we're not there yet, because that's a lot to ask of a teacher who's got 30 kids in the class to be that
Yeah.
open and loving and validating. I couldn't do that, it'd be exhausting. So you're right. I mean, the system just doesn't work in general for that. But it is those individuals that are able to provide that and give that different energy that change things. Like, we're so lucky in our school, which is an inclusive school, but it's because of those couple of well-being teachers
Yeah.
who take all the kids that have any challenge, and they see them heart to heart. They really value them, and there's just a difference there. Like, these kids feel needed, wanted, and are able to work through any issues that they've got in a way that doesn't create that extra shame for them. So we're super lucky to have that, and I would love to see that
Mhm.
in all schools.
No, but I want to, like, I'm trying to be mindful of your time too, but I do want to talk a little bit about how you work with parents and children. And like one of the things that it says in your bio or whatever, it says that you blend science and soul in your coaching. So just like for someone who's listening, who is struggling, like where you were down the road before all of this unraveled, and like what makes your how are you able to help them better than like the traditional route would?
The traditional route generally focuses on fixing a problem. So, in my experience as a parent, that can still leave the parent feeling really full of shame because you're fixing a problem. I've created a child with a problem. I birthed a child who's not going to fit into society. So there's a lot of layers there. And so the way I help, and I feel like I bridge the gap between that, just therapists are beautiful. We have our own therapists in our family, and there's absolutely a need. However, there's a gap that's missing in my opinion, and that's the gap that I feel. So for parents of younger children, I really support the parent as the first priority, and particularly in that space of neurodivergence, but not exclusively, really help them to understand themselves in a deeper way and let go of that shame, that judgment that they feel from other people or from themselves, the comparing to other families who seem to just sail through and have well-behaved kids. And then so that's kind of the soul part of the work. And then there's a lot of practical tools and strategies that I give for parents and children that come from a space of accepting them as they are. So that we're not fixing a problem. It's just you're perfect the way they are. If you're going to have a 3-hour meltdown, helping the parent to see how perfect that is, and there's a lot in there, and how can you nurture yourself through it and nurture the child through it in the best way possible. So it's coming at it from a very different perspective, a very empowering perspective, to know that whatever you're going through, there are practical solutions to it. But when you shift your perspective on it as a parent and you start to see it in a different way, it's like it's not a problem anymore. Yes, it's a challenge. Life is always challenges. We're always up and down, every single one of us. But it's not I'm not trying to take away any stress, but I'm giving you the tools to handle those situations. We had a beautiful experience recently where my son was suspended from school. And honestly, it was the best experience for all of us. I am so proud of myself. I'm proud of him. I'm proud of us all because I had the tools to handle it in the right way. Not once did I fall into guilt that I'd done something wrong, worrying about his future, fear of the judgment, none of that. I was able to wholly support him in the way he needed. And because I was able to do that, he could shine because he knew, he could feel how connected and supportive the environment was for him. So the growth that he had through it was incredible. I never could have picked that some of the stuff he said afterward, like the wise words that came out of his mouth, I was like, blew my mind. And I'm like, this has been an incredible experience. And he sees it that way now. Like, yeah, I learned a lot. And for me to be able to have that experience and honestly pin it as one of my best parenting moments, as opposed to if I hadn't had learned all this, it just would have been devastating. And
That's a really, really good example of I I strongly, strongly believe that even children, so I usually think of boys, even if the world outside of them doesn't understand them, doesn't kind of respect what their gifts are or their challenges, if they have a home environment where they see that they are seen and validated and respected, and then they'll be fine. But
totally.
so it's very beautiful what you just shared.
And then the next step I add into that is to help them to see that and give them the tools. And depending on the age, obviously, with sort of from 12 up, I can work with the children themselves or the teens, giving them those tools. Yeah, you know what? Maybe the world is going to hate on you. Maybe that teacher's always going to be that way. So how are you going to show up? How can we make you shine and have all the skills and everything you need to know you're the best, even if that teacher is always horrible? And that's the space I work in, rather than seeing it, which a lot of therapists sadly still do, as, okay, there's a problem, let's diagnose something and we're fixing a problem. It's like, no, we're just going to build you up, because the world is always going to throw stuff at you through your whole life. So let's give you some of the tools now and start building you up to believe in yourself and build up that self-esteem now. And then you'll be able to handle so much more when you're growing up anyway.
What kind of skills do you work on with the children or with the parents? Like I know I read about the tapping. Like is that one of your core tools?
Yeah, so I use EFT, which is tapping. That's more when you're looking at, well, that's like a therapeutic tool. So that's used for lots of different reasons. If for a parent is really struggling to see their child in a different way, which I completely understand and have been there as well myself, then tapping is a really great tool to help release some of that trauma from your body and give you fresh perspectives. It's an amazing tool for neurodivergent kids themselves, because there's ways you can do it in secret in the classroom where no one will know you're doing it. And that's what I teach the kids. And so they have a tool they can access at any time that's calming their brain activity and their nervous system. And I've got, depending on the age of the kid, I sometimes change the name. Like, so the younger ones, I call it your magic buttons. Mm-hmm. And so there's all these like 9-year-olds running around this area going, if you feel stressed, just use your magic buttons. It's pretty amazing. And so I teach self-regulation tools such as tapping. That's part of the practical strategies for helping with those big emotions. We also really dive into just what that emotion is and how we move it through your body. And then you can get, depending on who you're working with, you can get specific with the triggers and understanding, especially with the older kids, what's triggering you. And then with parents in particular and kids, if they're older, then we start looking at that understanding of the way they're perceiving themselves or their child. And the way that at the moment they're talking to themselves. So for parents about, have they got one of their parents or their in-laws in their ear saying, just be stricter, so how you change your perceptions around that and deal with that kind of thing, or the judgment that you feel because your kid's screaming and the teacher's rung you 3 times, and how you feel about that. So there's the self-soothing, the looking at the emotions and giving you the tools practically to move you to a stronger position, but also deeply understanding why you think the way you do. And that from that space, you can then have some alternative thoughts, which is a process we learn together. And when you start thinking about your child in a different way, or for your child themselves, when they start thinking about themselves in a different way, you start to just see that reflected in the environment. So I've worked with a lot of kids around bullies, and when you talk to them about how they're feeling, help them understand those feelings and change their energy, and so they show up different, the bullies drop off. Like, it just becomes a non-event for them, but they have to change in themselves first. And that's the opposite to a therapist that will, or even the schools are guilty of this too. They're not trying to build up the kids. They're like, let's stamp out the bully. Okay, yeah, I get that the bully's part of the problem, but giving our kids the tools to manage those people, to me, is almost more important.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, what would you recommend for parents? Like, often parents, usually around 4 years old, that's when they will start wondering, oh, should I get my child diagnosed? Is this especially for boys, if they've started preschool by that point, there are so many um, recommendations to have young boys tested for ADHD because of this natural energy level they have. But what would you, if a parent, their child is around 4 years old and they're wondering, should I be trying to get, him tested to find out what kind of advice would you give that parent?
I would probably say, have a look at your reasons for wanting to push ahead with testing. Is it coming from a place of, I need this problem to be fixed and go away? Or am I looking for deeper understanding? Having a diagnosis can be very helpful, or speaking to the relevant specialist, psychologist or pediatrician, and going through the steps to get an idea of what they think from a diagnostic perspective, is very, very useful, because it just can help, especially at that age, it can help you as a parent to sort of decide which way you're going to go in terms of how you parent. However, I would just say that having a label isn't the be all and end all. And it doesn't mean that you have to live your life based on what that label says. So as soon as you get a label, it puts a box around you. And that box says hyperactive, can't concentrate, can't focus, might be those kind of things. And it's very easy to then focus on that and see that as how your child is. And it can prevent you then from actually seeing what your child is really capable of. Those are all learnable skills, but a label can distort that a little bit. It can help you because it makes you feel like you belong somewhere. Okay, this is the box we fit in. So you can sort of look for other parent support in that space. However, the label itself can be harmful if you're unaware and you start to just live by what the label says. And I did that for years once I had my diagnosis. Oh, executive function skills non-existent, or I have executive function disorder as part of my autism. So for years, I let that be my excuse for why the house was a mess and this and that, until I actually learned more about myself and my coaching, and realized I didn't want to live in that little box that says I have executive function order. So I'm just pushing the boundaries of that. What skills do I need to learn? What do I need to outsource? How does organization look for me? Very different to someone else, I can tell you that. But and is my house a show home? Probably not. But it's also not a complete disaster. And I've had to be able to break through the label to go, okay, I get that why the label is there and it's useful to an extent, but then if you want to push yourself as a person, you still have to push yourself as a person and decide who you're going to be regardless of the label. So for a parent of a 4-year-old, I would say, if you're really concerned, speaking to a professional can really help you to just make sense and then decide what path you're going to take. But just don't let the label become everything. Don't mean that that's limitations and that your child is not going to ever be able to make friends or anything like that, because that's simply not true.
It's a real issue in schools because teachers will often say, listen, we've got to have a diagnosis because I need that report so that I can
Yes.
understand how I can help your child better. And that's the
Yeah.
perspective they're coming from. And
Yeah.
from the parents' point of view, so many parents are really um, adverse to putting that label on them. But then the concern is also, well, if the label is going to get them better support and understanding at school, it's going to help their self-esteem.
Yeah.
Like it's really a difficult situation.
In terms of schooling, I personally am quite pro getting a diagnosis, but that comes from a personal space of seeing how having the piece of paper has supported my children, particularly as they're going, like now my son's about to head into high school and my daughter's already at high school, and they're actually having to do exams and more serious schoolwork. And the extra support they get is pretty brilliant.
Yeah.
Extra time. Um, like my son's not great at he's got dysgraphia, so he's better off on a keyboard, so he gets given that option instead of writing with some things. There's all sorts of extra support, so in that respect I love the fact that we have a diagnosis. I wouldn't change it. I'm happy we have the label, but we don't let that label define us.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we use it for the benefits like that. And in the school system, there are still a lot of schools that really won't look at your giving your child any extra supports unless they have the piece of paper,
Yeah.
which is a sad thing. Instead of that, what's supposed to be inclusive,
Yeah.
you know. And so, in that respect, yeah, it can be super useful, but just don't let it define you or your child after that. Use it
I
to your
think,
advantage.
yeah, I think it's really exciting that there are people like you who are thinking a little bit differently and just getting your message out there. So that's where I want to go because I know I'm talking too much here. Where can people find you, get more information from you, and if they want to have these conversations, a little bit deeper with you, where do they go?
Best place is my Facebook page, Nova Rose Coaching. That's probably where you'll get most information from me, or my website, novarose.co. That's co, not .com.
Okay. Okay. So, and I'll make sure that I put those in the show notes as well. Nova, is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you wish we had of?
No, I think I would just really finish by saying if your child is neurodivergent, if you've got a little boy that has got big emotions, it doesn't mean he's always going to be that way. It doesn't mean he's going to go off the rails and end up in jail, which is what a lot of parents
Yeah.
go to. What it means is that he's a little child still managing with big emotions. And if you can get the support you need for yourself to be able to, like we talked about, to be able to help with his self-esteem and get your energy right with how you talk to him, he will absolutely thrive. So yeah, please, it's a good thing. And being neurodivergent, I had a little laugh to myself with the statistic you gave at the start was 16 to 20% or something like that. That makes me laugh because it's my whole world. So I'm like, oh, are there neurotypical people out there in the world? I forget because
Well,
my
see,
world is
I
autistic.
did exactly the same thing when I realized that I could easily be classified as a highly sensitive person. And as I looked into that a little bit more, it was the same thing. It said it's about 20% of the population. And my reaction was, there are more people like me. I am not the only one. And that was a real comforting thing. Like you said, the label doesn't really mean anything, but just understanding that, you're fine just the way you are. There are other people who have similar struggles as you do. And, you know,
Yeah.
it, we're all different, but
And you
that's
find your
okay.
tribe as
Yeah,
well as you grow up,
exactly.
particularly for parents. It's like your kid will find their tribe. and they
Yeah.
will find the people that they want to hang out with that lift them up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, but thank you so much. Like I do feel like I have such a better understanding. At least I've got a better framework to be learning more. And I commend your work, and I hope lots of people reach out because it's so important, and our children deserve that. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And to our listeners, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm sure there'll be lots here that you'll be able to take away and apply to your own life and get some information and motivation. And do reach out to Nova if you'd like to find out more. Stay tuned next week for more conversations about little boys. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. Every conversation we have here is a step toward raising boys who feel seen, heard, and deeply valued. If you're looking for more support on this journey, I invite you to visit me at sonhoodcoaching.com. You'll find a link in the show notes. And as always, thank you for being part of this important movement. Until next time, take good care.